So hello everybody, I'm Denes Boros, GM in residence, and today we're going to discuss the Knights tournament. Actually, I found three themes. One of them is endgames, castling at the right moment, and tactics. Let's start with the fun part, tactics. So the first game is between Anon versus Mr. Pope, and this game is a d4 e5. This is uncharacteristic, it's rare, but as Mr. Pope said, it's not as bad as it looks. D takes c5, knight c6, knight f4. I would prefer to go knight f3 and protect the pawn, queen e7 and bishop f4. This is very similar to what happens in the Alban, which is the twin sister or brother, this opening. And even here, usually white defends the e5 pawn. And a3 is usually played because e3 often runs to bishop b4 check, which is pretty annoying, as bishop d2 can be encountered with d takes c3, and f takes c3, and that would sadden white with those two weak pawns. So e5, which was played, is called the Englund gambit, for those of you who don't know. At least that's what it's called by the books. I don't know what's the name here in America. D takes e5, knight c6, f4. And as Mr. Pope showed me this game and pointed out that f4 was given an exclamation point because it protects the e5 pawn. But even though Koltanovsky claims this is a good move, I would disagree, and so did Mr. Pope. And I agree with him, because after f6, he just destroys the kingside pawn structure of white, and white will have some issues with development. Takes, knight f3, and I ask the audience here, what move would you come up with here? You're pawn down, but possibly, how could black try to enforce more action and develop an initiative?
Well, just quickly, bishop c5.
That's a good option.
Castle afterwards.
Yeah, bishop c5 castle is a great option. Any other suggestions? Yeah, bishop c5 is an idea. e3 and castles, just to play on development, right? Also d5, which is straightforward, played by Mr. Pope, and I really like the idea as he's trying to castle queenside. Bishop g4, bishop e2, queen d7, and this position starts to look more and more like a Chigorin, but with the difference that the pawn is on f4. And that's, of course, is an advantage for black, as the e3 pawn is easily attacked now. Castles, long castles, b3, and now what should be played here by black?
Well, I'll get in and try bishop c5, backing up the pawn.
Yeah. This is the point that I really liked by black's play, that he could play bishop c5 immediately, hitting on the e3 pawn. But instead, he's waiting for the right moment till white commits himself to play b3 himself and then strike on e3. Because now it hurts much more, as the b pawn invites other tactical ideas because of the a1 rook and king on g1, both on the black, being on the black squares. They might be in the way. So there might be a d4 idea, where after exchanges there's bishop d4 check, where the king and the rook is attacked at the same moment, at the same time. Knight d4, bishop takes e2, knight takes e2, rook e8, knight d4. And black is continuing with the theme. He's trying to emphasize the dark squared weaknesses. What could have Mr. Pope played here?
just quickly looking,
Mhm.
maybe knight to g4.
Knight to g4. What is the idea behind knight g4?
Well, now there's a double attack on that e3 pawn, and I think then at some point I'd like to have a rook lift, so I can move it over to the h file. And he's going to be in the way right where he is.
Yeah, the main idea is correct, that you're pinpointing the black squared weaknesses. Rook e1, knight takes d4, e takes, and bishop takes d4 check. Nice combination. As white cannot take with the queen, because rook takes e1 and we win the game, because it's mate. So bishop d4, bishop e3, bishop takes e3, rook takes c3, and black went on to win this game as he's up a lot of material. So the second game, which is also tactics game, is played by Davies Jim and Matt Barrett. And this is again will be about attacking and sacrificing. So it's e4, c6. This is the classical Caro-Kann that Mr. Matt Barrett is playing. D takes c4, knight d7. Knight d7 is Karpov's favorite idea. But today everyone's playing bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6. And this was even recently played by Giri versus Veryi. And the result was shocking, a draw. Interestingly, knight d7 was played by Matt. And this is a much more rare move, one of the favorites of Karpov. And this structure will resemble more like a French defense without the e and d pawn. Knight f3 and e6, bishop d3, bishop e7. He's getting ready to take, he doesn't want to develop the knight immediately, because if he takes, then he has to take with the knight. If the bishop is already developed on e7, knight f6, like knight f6 here, takes, and bishop takes f6 is possible. Okay, knight b6, defending against annoying knight d6 ideas. Castle, knight f6, queen e2, castles. Oh no, knight d5. Yes, and that's a good idea, what Mr. Matt Barrett is doing. You should first develop your pieces before deciding if you want to castle or not. Because if he would have castled immediately, that would have just invited white to do what? Yeah, exchange the knights with the idea of?
Queen to e4.
Yeah. And g6, bishop h6. And yeah, there's a lot of holes in black's position. It's like a Swiss cheese right now. So he didn't want that, so he played knight d5 immediately. Bishop went back to d2. Takes, knight f6. So b6. And black is playing for a waiting strategy. He knows that white is ready to jump on him. So in this position, he decides to wait it out. He wants to see what Mr. Jim Davis's idea here, and what he wants, what plan he has for this position. Rook e1, and now castles. He was convinced now that, okay, I'm not going to get mated, so I can castle right now. c4, bishop b7, bishop c3. And what natural move should black play now?
Queen c7?
Because c5 would run into d5s, and then the e7 bishop is hanging. So queen c7, rook c1, rook e8, just defending the e7 pawn so he can get ready to play c5. Knight e5, rook d8, g4. Is g4 a good idea? Good or bad idea in this position?
Good if you're aggressive.
Yeah, it could be good if you're aggressive. What are the pluses of g4? Raise your hand if you feel it's a good attacking move if the position stays stays closed. Yeah. This is actually a dangerous idea until black realizes that he has no time and can't keep the position closed. So what did he play here? Flank attacks should be countered with?
Center attacks.
Yeah, centered breaks. C5. Oh, bishop d6. Bishop d6 was played here, and now c5. g5, bishop takes c5. And black is trying to open up the position as quickly as possible. Otherwise, an attack would just crush the black king. What would happen if black plays knight d7? There are some tactical patterns here.
Queen h5, I like.
There's something more direct than that, more forcing than queen h5, but it's...
Even bishop takes h7.
Exactly. And like a windmill, white keeps on checking if he'd like, but after rook e3, the resignation is about to come, because knight f8, check, and smothered mate. That is quite rare these days. So black didn't want that, so he took on e5, d takes e5, and the best defense is attack. Queen c, oh, rook takes d3, e takes f6, queen c6, and surprisingly, the bishop on b7 is much, much stronger than the bishop on c3. And opposite colored bishops in these kind of positions, the more aggressive attacking side has the better bishop. So the bishop on b7. Rook f1, rook e3, taking away more space from the white queen, as the g2 square is now hard to protect. Queen d2, queen h1, king f2, rook f3, and queen g2 won the game. So what was really instructive in this game was that that black decided to wait till the right moment to castle, also started counterattacking soon as white decided to just plunge into an attack on the flank side.
So where did white go wrong?
G4 was a bit hasty, as C5 was just a too big of a counter punch. So that C5 idea just was too strong. Otherwise, if the position would have been closed, G4 would have been pretty strong. But black knew the idea and punished white for his adventurous play. All right. So we're at the theme of castling. I want to start with a game between Jansen and Sundara. And this game, black plays a textbook example how you should wait out till the right moment to castle or not to castle. White didn't know and didn't time well, and he got punished. So knight d7, bishop g5. This is fairly standard King's Indian that is played, but knight f6, bishop d3, c5, queen c2, queen c7, b6. So white decides to castle early, and then black decides, okay, I'm going to wait for the right moment for me to decide if I want to castle or not. So white plays knight e4, bishop b7, a3, rook c8. The play of black is exemplary. You don't need to castle yet, because you might run into an attack yourself. So black decides to wait it out and just go on and attack the white king. Takes, and how should white take back? How should black take back?
Guess it's a knight.
Yeah, knight takes and knight takes. After the exchanges, taking on c5 is a great idea, as we can see the differences between king safety. Black king is very safe on e8, and unfortunately for white, there is no queen takes e7, as black would just take, and lose a piece. So that's not a threat anymore, has to go back. And just because of this great decision by black of not castling, the black's position is not under attack, while white's king is under constant pressure. b5, spending all the energy possible to actually break through before white could consolidate his position. Bishop f4, b takes c4, rook d5, knight d3, king b1, knight takes f4, e takes f4, rook b8. Just look at the king differences. The king on e8 is just super protected, while the king on b1 is just totally naked. That b2 pawn is just extremely weak because of this dragon and Grunfeld bishop striking down there. Queen a4 check, queen d7. It's one more idea to run into an endgame and play an endgame instead of a pretty hopeless middle game, but it's still lost. c3, rook c2, rook b3, and beautiful mate and finish by black. So this was a good example how one should decide when to castle and which moment to choose to decide to castle. Black was determined to play more aggressive and wait with the castling, so at the right moment the attack would strike and just win.
He also knows he's 400 points higher than the other player, right?
Yeah.
So he probably realizes he's not playing against a really strong player, so he can afford to leave his king in the center.
It's true, but it's true that black had 400 more points, but the way the game was played was pretty instructive. Black objectively played a very good game and a very instructive game of attacking when you should attack and castle if you must. Although, in general, castle. And in the second game, actually, continuing the theme of castling, that's what hurt the same player in this night's tournament. Oh no, not this one. Excuse me. In this game, the same player, although this time black was the underdog with 200 points less. Coryea Dan having 1800 and Sundara Rakshana 1622. But the theme is the same, only the difference will be the understanding of the position. So it's a close position, so everyone has time to maneuver around. Castle c5, and c5 I would call somewhat dubious. Knight f6 was to be called for, and it was time to castle short after, for example, knight g3 and castling. And black is definitely okay, as white's pieces are not ideally placed. c5, unfortunately for black, violates some kind of basic principles in chess. The first game that was played by the same player was great because the position was close, so in that game black had the chance to play and keep the king in the center. In this game, if you open up your position, you don't get to do so. c5, d takes c5. White rightly decides to open up the position as the black king is stuck in the center. D takes c5, bishop b5, immediately hitting on the d7 knight, as it's now an annoying pin. Bishop takes e4, rook d1, bishop f5, knight g3, knight f6, takes, knight e, bishop takes c5. And unfortunately for black, there's no way out of this pin without losing material. And that's the issue in this position. That's why it hurt black so much not to castle while having an opened up position. Black was able to get away with that in the previous game as the position was closed. But whenever the position opens up, you cannot have the luxury to stay in the center. So castles, bishop takes, d7, takes, and eventually white won this game. So the last theme that I wanted to talk about is the endgame. So in this game, black is playing pretty well, but will forget something important, breaking through. C takes d4, bishop b5, a nice thematic idea, as black wants to get rid of the white squared bishops, and now he could have a favorable French. Knight c3, c6. Now how should black develop here? What kind of ideas you guys have? It's not that easy to develop here, as the pieces are just in each other's way.
Yeah, how do you save that white pawn, d pawn?
Oh, the d pawn is fairly well protected with the two knights.
Oh,
so
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, any ideas how to develop with black and just be able to castle kingside? Well, usually there are two options, either with the knight or the bishop.
Yeah.
So knight e7 was played, which is the traditional, but even this snake-like idea could possibly be an option, like bishop e3, b3, bishop d8, bishop b2, knight e7. Although a bit non-standard and exotic, but it's still an option. Okay, knight e7, b3, knight f5, bishop e7. Most probably this is the best way of developing the pieces, as g4 doesn't really work, as knight h4 and the g4 just pawn will be just a weakness. So rook c1, castles, g4, knight h4. I do think it's not really advised to play this yet, as I don't see any big advantages of playing it right now. Takes, f4, bishop e7, king h1. White wants to play f5, but that runs into some problems. What are the problems with f5?
Knight takes e5.
And knight takes c5 as the queen just attacks on the long diagonal. And so therefore white played king h1, rook c8, f5, bishop g5. A very smart move. If you give me a good position for my bishop, I say thank you, and I take it. Knight f4, knight b4. I'm not that happy with knight f4, as just pins the knight, and maybe it would have been a better idea to go and play rook c3, as knight b4 would be countered with a3. Notice I didn't play rook c2, because that would actually run into knight b4, and white is forced to take now, as the rook was attacked, and after a3, knight c2, and the e3 square is so weak that black is most likely much better, if not winning. So knight f4 was played, although I think rook c3 would have been better. Knight b4, good idea by black. a3 takes, bishop takes, knight c6, f takes. And who is better here? What do you think?
Black, because his king is to be more active.
Yeah. Black is better because he has a more active king, and also the knight is just so much stronger than the bishop that hits into its own pawns. g5, which is not a great move. Bishop e3 should have been played, bolstering the d4 pawn and hoping to survive, although knight takes e5 could be annoying here as well, as knight takes e5, queen f1 check is parried by knight f7, and black is just a healthy pawn up. So g5 is played, queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, b4, king f7, a6, and here black needs to be more precise than he was in this game, as even it's not noticeable at this moment, but the position is about to get really closed down. So king g6 was called for, as after h4, king f5, the black king is coming in. a6 was played, knight c6, king f3, king e7, king e3. So what problems white might encounter? I mean, what problems will black encounter in this position if he's trying to win? Talking about the nature of the position.
I'm looking.
Mm-hmm. How many entrances are there for black to infiltrate into white's position?
Hardly any at this point.
Yeah, not much.
Yeah.
So black should be in a hurry to create or open up the position to actually win. G6, so G6 is not a good idea because he should be running that way and trying to infiltrate and get closer to the white pawns. Unfortunately for black, after G6, there are not many entry points in this position. H3, King D7, Bishop D4 takes, and this was a mistake as now. Yeah, now white has a great move that will just draw the game. How could white create a blockade in this position?
A4?
Mm-hmm. A4, closing all lanes for black, and there's no entry left anymore. And even if black would try to get tricky, in A5, white could just ignore and play B5, and it's a draw. So maybe the last chance was to play King B6, but B6 was definitely drawish. King B6 most likely is still an idea to play on, and most likely that's the best chance. B6 already draws, as there is no entry point. A5, B5 check, as white correctly judges the position as drawn. And this is one of those rare situations where the position is so closed up that even a protected passed pawn isn't enough to win the game. And that is kind of sad, but hooray if you're white and not hooray if you're black. Because even though black tries to open up the position, there's no way to get through. And even though black has that D5 pawn, there's no way through. Okay, and last but not least, the game.
Is that the way the game ended?
Yes, it was a draw. It was a draw. So the last game, played by Jansen Blake and Schechter Neil, Schechter Neil. I wanted to show this game as black, even though higher rated than white, plays an exemplary way of how to play an endgame. So it's a London system, which is kind of popular these days for the reasons that Cousin is playing it. If Cousin would be playing, I don't know, the King's Gambit, everyone would be playing the King's Gambit, I suppose. So knight d2, c6, z3, queen b6, rook b1, bishop f5, knight c4. Nice way of defending the b2 pawn, as otherwise black would just take the pawn. And there's no trick, as knight c4, queen takes a2, rook a1. This usually traps the queen, but because of the f5 bishop, black can play queen c2, and the black queen escapes. So knight c4 was a great idea by white. Queen d8, bishop d3 takes b5. So if your opponent has the advantage in the center, where should you try to find counterplay?
Flanks.
Flanks, yeah. And that's what black does. a5, and he's trying to expand on the queen side, having both these pawns advancing and trying to push white back. b3, knight a6, castle, knight h5. Also a thematic idea, as black wants to take the bishop. So therefore, white should have considered playing h3, because after knight h5, the bishop can go to h2 and provide a little shelter for this piece. So knight a6, castle, knight h5, rook e1, knight takes f4. I mean, it's a good idea to take something that's given to you immediately, as it's better to have something than to regret not having it later. Rook e8, defending the e7 pawn, a4, knight c7, knight e4. White is trying to centralize his pieces, but he lost something. What did white lose with e takes f4? Usually the pawns take towards the center, and now, yeah, now white played away from the center, took the knight, and therefore the pawn is away from the center. Rook b8, rook e3, knight d5, knight takes f4. Unfortunately, that was losing a pawn. Queen e3, knight d5, queen d3, knight f6. And what should someone do if they're a pawn up?
Trade pieces.
Yeah, trading pieces is always a great idea if you're a pawn up. And that's just what black does. Knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, rook e3, e5. Takes, and what should we take it with? Bishop or the pawn?
I guess we'll take with the pawn.
Yeah. Why would you take with the pawn?
Must be wrong. I'd like to exchange queens at this point.
And
Better endgame.
yeah, and why not with the bishop?
I really like that bishop.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
bishop.
correct. The bishop is so strong in open positions, and also if the pawns are on two sides, it's a great idea to preserve your bishops and just torture the knight. And also, as you pointed out, queen exchange is a great idea if you're up in an endgame. Queen takes d8, rook takes d8, rook e1, e4, knight d4, bishop takes d4, takes, h3, f5, rook e6, takes, rook c8, rook b8, rook e5, check, rook c3. And now are some nasty threats from white. How should we defend that?
Let's move one of your rooks back.
Yeah, or come with the king. King f8 takes. And now we reach this endgame as white takes on b5. Whenever we reach an endgame, it's good to note the strongest piece in the position. Which is the strongest piece in an endgame?
The king.
The king, yeah. So, whose king is better in this position, whites or blacks? Black, yeah, by a mile. The black king is just a monster compared to that lonesome king on g1. So, if we're a pawn up, how should we proceed in this position? Just notice a5 is hanging at the same time.
Try to exchange rooks.
Yeah, exchange rooks. And if that doesn't work,
Try to pass pawn and push it.
yeah, it'd be a great idea to have a.
Pawn.
Yeah, it's a great idea to create a pass pawn. Unfortunately, it's not possible, but a4 will be, or rook b4, what was played. But a4 is, as suggested, is also a great idea, as black gets rid of those extra pawns and he's up a healthy one. Rook b4, rook takes a5, rook b3, rook a7. Well played by white, as it's most difficult for black to win this position if his king is cut off. In these endgames, pawn structure is paramount. What would be the ideal setup for white if he would like to defend this endgame? Oh, I mean, I'm talking about pawn structure.
Some sort of minority attack.
Well, I mean, usually in these positions, white has no chance of attacking, but is sometimes capable of setting up a defensive line. So if white would have the chance, he would want to play h4 and g3. And usually the h4, g3, f2, I'm going to show you that. h5, h4, let's just make some imaginary moves with black. This position is very drawish because there's not enough material left for black to win the game. He can try and try as hard as he wants to, but most likely, objectively, the position is drawn. So that would be the dream scenario for white. So black will try to cram down before white could do that. So he plays h5, rook g7, rook b6, rook comes back, rook b1. And notice that black is winning a tempo with giving a check and playing rook b2 and hitting on the f2 pawn. King g3. So black doesn't give any time for white to set up this barricade, because if he would play king g1, then there's a good move that would stop white from ever playing h4. What's that move?
G5.
G5, that's one idea.
F4.
F4, that's also good. F4 is also a good idea, but h4 is even better in this position, as black will cramp white down forever. So that will most likely win the game for black. So white played king g3, king g3, and now there's this great move. What is going on? h4 check, king takes, rook takes f2. So what did black achieve in around 10 moves? What was his achievement?
He's got a pass pawn.
Yeah.
I think he stopped.
Yeah, defended pass pawn. The white king is offsides, and the rook is way away from the defensive. It's just attacking the black king. So white goes on and tries to do his best and try to mate black, which unfortunately will not work. King g5, rook takes g2, king f6, king d8, king e6, king c8, rook g7, and we just start rolling our pawn as Mr. Schechter Neil did. King d6, e2, king c6, and white resigned, but I'm still curious what could be the move here that wins.
Well, if it's white's move.
It's obviously it's rook g8 for white, but how can black find a way and avoid disaster hitting before winning the game?
I mean, just move his king.
Yeah, king d8,
Yeah.
and king d6, and king e8.
Eventually he attacks.
And the problem is that
Queen. That's it.
we say hello to the new queen, and that's the end of the story. Basically, these were the three themes: castling, attacking, and playing the endgame, trying to realize that you need to open up the position when you're a pawn up. And also, you need to exchange some pieces if you're going for a win in an endgame. Although you need to keep some pawns up on the position because you have to promote one of them to have a queen.